Kentucky basketball has yet another massive SEC showdown, and this one, it's got a little bit more history behind it than you might think.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be previewing Kentucky basketball's matchup against the 12-2 Georgia Bulldogs. This one's going to be on the road in Athens, big-time SEC showdown. What do we know about the Dogs? How will this matchup shake out? It is yet another big-time game. Quad one opportunity for Mark Pope and the Cats, and this one's got a little bit more history than you might think. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the show, and if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky versus Georgia, previewing the matchup between the Bulldogs and the Wildcats. Kentucky 12-2, Georgia 12-2. The only thing separating these two teams record-wise is their record in conference play. Kentucky started off with a huge victory in Rupp Arena against Florida on Saturday. Georgia going on the road and losing in what was a much tighter contest than the score may indicate against Ole Miss on the road in Oxford. A little bit of history here to start this one off here for you. Mark Pope, obviously, as we all know, started his coaching career in Georgia, in Athens back in 2009 on Mark Fox's first staff in Athens. In case you didn't know, Mark Fox also the head coach of the Bulldogs from 2009 to 2018. Obviously, these two coaches returning to a place that they kind of both kick things off in the SEC, at least coaching-wise. For Mark Pope, a little bit of a different story. This one, I think, is going to mean a little bit more to both these guys. Just right off the bat, I just want to throw it out there. I think that Pope and Fox are going to do everything they can to try and go and win this game against a pretty good Georgia squad, by the way. I just also want to get that out of the way here, too. Georgia's good. I've heard some people and read things about some people saying, man, Georgia's not that good of a basketball team. You don't just stumble upon 12-2. Yes, they struggled on the road against Ole Miss, but I think you're going to see it tonight. It's hard to win on the road in the SEC. It's hard to win and look comfortable on the road in the SEC. So, bit of history, big-time matchup for Kentucky. I think they're going to want this one. Georgia, like I mentioned, 12-2, 0-1 in the SEC. Number 50 according to KenPom, number 36 according to the net. They are 1-2 in quad one games. Mike White, the head coach of the Dogs, was at Florida for 7 seasons. 142-88 was his record. Then he transferred over to Georgia, 48-35 in 3 seasons so far, 291 and 163 overall. What do we know about the Dogs just generically? Well, they've been very impressive defensively. If you want to go look at what they're doing on KenPom, this is a top 30 defense in the country. They're number 28 in adjusted defensive efficiency, and statistically, they do a lot of really good things on that side of the ball. They have a top 20 effective field goal percentage. They're top 100 in turnover percentage. They're almost top 100 in offensive rebound percentage. They're top 35 in both 3-point and 2-point percentage, top 15 in block percentage. I mean, they do everything well. They get steals, blocks, they hold you to low shooting percentages. They don't allow a ton of second chance opportunities. This is a very, very, very good defense that has allowed them to stay in a lot of games and allowed them to pick up some big time wins. Wins over St. John's, Georgia Tech, and Notre Dame to be specifically. Georgia's front court coming up big in all of those contests. And speaking of that front court, it kind of starts and ends with Georgia with what they're doing down low. 5-star freshman Asa Newell has been absolutely phenomenal so far this season. He leads the Dogs in scoring, over 15 points per game here. Somto Cyril, who Kentucky fans know very well, a prospect that Coach Cal was going after for a long time. Kentucky had a cup of coffee with, a very long cup of coffee with, I might add. But these two guys, Newell and Somto, have both been really, really good. Somto, less of a scorer, but pretty efficient from the floor overall. I would say 73.2% shooting is pretty dang solid to go along with 4.5 rebounds with his 5.5 points. Again, Newell, 15.4 points, 6.9 rebounds, 1.1 assists, 1 steal, 1 block, shooting 58.8% from the floor and 26.9% from three. That's something to note here, is that Newell, while he does primarily play most of his minutes at the 5, he can also step up to the 4. He's played some minutes there, while Somto or Justin Abson, a 6'9", 245-pound junior, steps in at center. This is a very, very solid front court that can defend, that can score efficiently, that can rebound. They can do everything. Newell has been very, very, very good. Again, they're coming off a 63-51 loss to Ole Miss, and as we'll discuss later on in the show, you saw a lot of different positive things in that game despite only scoring 51 points, and you've seen a lot of positive things from other big-time matchups that they've had so far this season. They've got several guys that can attack the rim and finish consistently. This kind of reminds me in a way of the matchup against Clemson that Kentucky had earlier this year. The only difference here is I think that Georgia's going to want to play with a little bit less tempo, and that Clemson team didn't want to play fast much at all. At least it didn't seem like it. 80.4 points per game. You've got slashers all over the place outside of Newell. Deshane Montgomery, I believe, transferred in from Mount St. Mary's. He's averaging 13.5 points per game. Very solid shooting splits, 57 and 36.4 from beyond the arc. Dakota LaFew, Silas Demery, who's a sophomore that's been here for a hot minute with Georgia. Tyrin Lawrence, which we'll get to here in just a second. They've got guys all over the court that can drive in and can finish with consistency. This is not a big three-point shooting team. They're going to try and pack it in. They're going to try and make you defend them at the rim. They're going to try and draw fouls a little bit as well. This is a good team. It's a good team with some solid personnel. It feels like a team that is a year away from being like really, really good. And yes, that means some of their seniors will be out of the program at that point. But they've got a lot of solid sophomore and freshman contributors that I think can be big for them in the coming season. The X factor here is the guy I mentioned a second ago, Tyrin Lawrence. You may say, as a Kentucky fan, man, that name sounds kind of familiar, and it might strike some fear into the hearts of some of you guys, because Tyrin Lawrence played 4 years at Vanderbilt. He has 8 career games against Kentucky, and he tore them up in some really big-time games. He's played more minutes against Kentucky than any other opponent he has faced in his entire career. In those 8 games against Kentucky, he is shooting 53.1% from the floor and 36.8% from three. In his 5 starts against the Wildcats, he is averaging almost 17 points per game. In 119 career games, 3 of his 20 best game score games, which game score is a measurement used in analytics, 3 of his 20 best games, period, as a college basketball player are against Kentucky. 3 of his top 20 out of his 119 career games. That is the X factor in this one. Yes, Newell is impressive. Yes, Cyril is solid. Yes, they've got several guys like Deshane Montgomery, Dakota LaFew, Demery, who I mentioned, that are all scoring over Lawrence right now. This is the guy that I'm worried about. By far, the guy that I'm worried about the most. So we'll continue to break this down. Let's take a look at 2 of the most important games for Georgia this season that I think we can learn a lot about the Bulldogs from, and I think Kentucky will probably, try and implement some of the things that both of their opponents, the Bulldogs' opponents, did in those 2 games. Before we dive into that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff games is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of the past playoff games, and I cannot wait to make new memories with my friends with the updated format and the extra teams involved. It's truly a really fun time of the year, and Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I've used Game Time for sporting events. I've used Game Time for comedy, music, theater. I've gone to several different concerts actually in my area over the past half year or so using Game Time. It's the only place you need to go to get tickets for your upcoming events, and you can take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, continuing along here on the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. Hey, if you've got a score prediction for this game, go ahead and drop it in the comments below. I think this is going to be a very physical, tightly contested contest. You are going to see, that's kind of a redundant statement, but you've seen Kentucky face several opponents already this season that are pretty similar to Georgia. And I want to take a look at two important Georgia games so far this season that I think we can learn some things from as far as how the Bulldogs operate. The first game I want to take a look at is their loss to Ole Miss. It's their second loss of the season. Their other loss, by the way, was to Marquette at a neutral site. First loss in SEC play on the road at Ole Miss. Extremely competitive first half. Neither team shot very well. It was very physical. Both teams couldn't get anything going both inside and outside the arc. A lot of defensive rebounds. Sound familiar? Ole Miss started the second half on a 15-2 run. 15-2 run. Just blitzed it out of nowhere. Then Georgia had an 11-1 run after that with about 5-6 minutes left in the game. Things were relatively close. And then Ole Miss won a free throw contest pretty much for the remainder of the game. Both teams fouled. Georgia couldn't score, just could not buy a bucket, and they ended up scoring 51 points in that loss. 5 assists to just 15 turnovers for Georgia. Ole Miss had 10 blocks. What can we learn from that loss to Ole Miss? Georgia, as physical as they are themselves, struggles with physicality. Georgia also will struggle just a little bit on the road away from Athens. They have won, I believe, 11 straight games in Stegman Coliseum. I believe that's what it's called. They will play better than they did against Ole Miss. Expect physicality and don't expect Kentucky to give the same response for 2 reasons. Number one, the game's not going to get called the same way it was against Ole Miss. Yes, things tightened up late, but you're probably going to see a lot more fouls against Kentucky. And also, it's in Athens. You're going to see things get called differently, and you're going to see this Georgia team mentally prepare and execute differently. Home court advantage is a very real thing, and it's going to be a massive problem in this game. The second game I want to take a look at is against Georgia Tech. This was a game that Georgia won earlier this year, 69-77 in Atlanta. I want to note that there. Pure road environment. In the first half, Georgia absolutely shut down the Yellow Jackets in the first half. Georgia Tech had 19 points at halftime. It was 29-19. Major physicality difference. Major physicality difference down low. 13-2 Georgia Tech run to begin the second half, immediately followed by a 14-0 Georgia run in the second half. And then for the rest of the game, they just outmuscled them. Just outplayed them down low. They had several guards get to the rim. Newell had a couple of big-time shots. Neither team shot well from outside, but Georgia ended up shooting 60% from inside the arc. What does this tell you? Again, this team plays through their bigs and plays through their slashing guards. They will drive in, and they will score at the rim, and they will score effectively. Both on the road and at home, they will do that. It was a little bit more difficult for them to do it on the road. And I think you're going to see Kentucky run into a major problem with them matchup-wise. Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison, I'm concerned, may not be able to handle Asa Newell and Somto Cyril. I just don't know if they're going to be able to do so. And I point to this Florida game as the perfect example. Florida wanted to play with some tempo. They wanted to get up and down, and they wanted to kind of play similar basketball to what Kentucky likes to do. But the difference between those two teams was the fact that Florida likes to get it inside a good bit. And they've got big men that could just outmatch you. Georgia's going to play slower. Georgia's going to try and run this thing down, make it a relatively low-scoring affair, and just beat the ever-loving snot out of Kentucky at the rim, and then make sure that they don't get any clean shots off. So knowing those two games, knowing that they can both struggle offensively at times and struggle against physicality, while also being able to implement their brand of basketball at the rim, what are some of the keys to the game here? Well, first of all, where is Koby Brea? In case you didn't see it yesterday, Koby Brea was listed as questionable in the SEC injury report. I believe Montgomery was listed as probable, but Koby was listed as questionable, which essentially means 50-50. I don't know if he's hurt. I don't know if it's a sickness. I don't know if it's a personal matter. I don't know what's going on there. I expect him to play, but I'm not telling you it's going to happen. I'm hopefully expectant. So your first key to the game is making sure that Koby Brea, if he's available, plays well. You got to get something going from outside the arc, and Brea has been the most consistent guy this year. The second key to the game, play your brand of basketball. Tempo, speed in both the half court and in transition, and high-scoring, efficient basketball. Try and take Georgia out of their comfort zone. Try and not let this thing slow down where their bigs can sort of dictate the game. Play off of this by grabbing defensive rebounds. You can speed this game up if you do not allow second chance opportunities. I wrote this out in all caps, and we can clip this and put it on Twitter, and I will be wrong if I'm wrong. Statistically, Georgia, not a bad three-point shooting team, slightly above average at 34.2%. They simply do not take a ton of threes. They do not rely on the outside shot, so I'm basing this statement off of the numbers. I don't think Georgia can outshoot Kentucky in this game. If you grab defensive rebounds and you limit their opportunities to score again, Georgia cannot keep up. They may be able to keep up for an extended period of this game. They may be able to keep up for 18 minutes, but 38 minutes. But they're not going to be able to do it the entirety of the game. And I think that will be a massive aspect of this one. Excuse me, a little bit under the weather. Another key to the game is I would rather put them on the line, Kentucky put Georgia on the line than give them free baskets. If these guards are going to get downhill and get to the rim, foul them. They're going to do the same thing to you. Kentucky's had to deal with it against Clemson. They had to deal with it against Ohio State. They had to deal with it against Florida. If the officials are not going to call the game consistently, foul the crap out of them. I am so tired of seeing these as these several years I've been doing this show, you go up against opponents where their whole strategy is to just foul you and put you on the charity stripe, and it's super, super annoying. Georgia doesn't do that, by the way. I just want to throw that out there. They do a good job of getting to the line, but they don't foul the crap out of you. There are teams like South Carolina used to do this. Vanderbilt used to do this. I'm tired of seeing teams try and implement let's make it a free throw contest. Okay, if the game's going to get called that way against Kentucky where teams are just more physical when they shouldn't be allowed to be and they're getting away with it, I think Kentucky should try and push back. If it means Brandon Garrison fouls out, so be it. If it means Amari Williams gets to four fouls or fouls out in this game, so be it. I'm not giving extra opportunities by potential rebounds off of those misses, and I'm not giving potential opportunities to score easy buckets. Knock them in the mouth. And I don't mean literally. Just play your brand of basketball when it comes to tempo and speed, and to prevent the easy buckets and to grab defensive rebounds. Be as physical. Be as physical. If they're not gonna call it whenever you go down the court, if they're not gonna call physicality against Kentucky, if Kentucky's not gonna get those calls, the other team might as well not either. And the final thing here, I'm going to keep saying it until it happens. Jaxson Robinson needs to have a great game. And you guys know what I mean when I say great game. I mean, he's shooting above 50% volume on top of that. It's a 20-point plus performance. And he plays well on the defensive end of the floor. It's going to happen. It's going to happen at some point. This could be it. Final thing I'll say here, and I put this in, and I'll tab over to it real quick on my my computer. It's interesting to me how similar some of Georgia's offensive statistics are to Florida, according to KenPom, at least. Although, like, they're drastically different in terms of offensive efficiency, like adjusted efficiency. Florida's 3rd, Georgia's 71st. But just bear with me here for a second. Florida shoots 55.3% effective field goal percentage on offense. 55.3. Georgia's is 55.5. Offensive rebound percentage for Florida is 41.4. Georgia's is 39%. If you go and look at field goal percentages, Florida shoots 34.5% from 3. Georgia shoots 34.2%. Florida shoots 58% from 2, as does Georgia, 58% even. Florida shoots 72.2% from the foul line, as does Georgia, 72.2%. Block percentage for Florida, 7.5%. Georgia, 8.5%. There's not a ton of difference here between the way that both these teams kind of operate offensively in terms of shooting percentages. The only difference is that Florida, I think, takes more threes. It's a volume thing with Georgia, or Florida, rather. So those are the keys to the game. The big matchups are simply Asa Newell, Amari Williams, Brandon Garrison, Santos Cyril. That's where it starts and ends with me. And then Jaxson Robinson. If Deshane Montgomery goes, it's Jaxson Robinson against Deshane Montgomery. And then Tyrin Lawrence, will he explode? Will he just come out of nowhere like he has against Kentucky 5 times and just, here's 17 points in what essentially is the game? And by the way, I understand, and some of you might have already commented it, so I'll go ahead and get to this. Just because this is a different roster and a different head coach and a completely different style of game, for Lawrence, mentally, put yourself in his shoes for a second. As a college-age kid who has played 5 tremendous games against what is arguably the greatest college basketball program of all time, it does not matter if you put the Monstars out there. He knows in the back of his mind, I've played well against blue and white my entire life. I'm going to play well against blue and white again. It does not matter if it's a different team that he's playing with. It doesn't matter if he's going up against the Lakers. It doesn't matter. For him, in his state, all he knows is that I play well. I play well against this, and I'm going to play well again. The confidence is going to be there no matter what. He's not thinking in the back of his mind, well, Calipari's at a different school and whatever. He knows I play well against great competition. This is a team I've played well against. And we just have to see if he does it again, because he's like the 5th best scoring option on this team. All right, to wrap up the show, I want to get to my weekly market down prediction. This one's going to be a little close. We'll see if it happens here for Kentucky. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That is $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, the same game parlays, and so much more. You can visit the website and share betting lines here around the league. If you want to go and take a look on Twitter and you want to share with me, hey, look, here's a line that I threw down on the NFL playoffs. If you want to go put it on a Kentucky Wildcat, I would absolutely love for you to do so. Visit the website, share betting lines with me over at FanDuel.com. You can join there today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. Again, that is FanDuel.com. You can make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, wrapping up the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly segment, Mark It Down. I love that little sticker so much you have no idea. All right, so every single week on Monday or Tuesday, we like to give you a prediction, a hot take for the upcoming 2 games of the schedule. for Kentucky basketball, and we tell you to mark them down. And, of course, we will revisit them at the end of the week. Last week, I said that Kentucky would finish the week averaging 38.5% from three against their two opponents, Brown and Florida. They absolutely crushed that. They shot, I believe, just a tad under that against Brown, and they needed to shoot 41.3% against Florida, and they shot like 48%. So they crushed it. Absolutely crushed it. This week, where do we go? Well, I think this is going to be a prediction in the form of scoring margin for Kentucky. And in case you're wondering, you're like, Lance, where's your prediction for Georgia? I think Kentucky wins, but I'm not going to say how much. Here's all I'm going to say with my mark it down prediction. Mark this one down, sticker again. Kentucky scoring margin for this week will be +5. I think Georgia loses to Kentucky. I think Kentucky finds a way to win on the road in a very competitive, tough game. Depends on whether or not Koby Brea is there. Depends on whether or not Jaxson Robinson plays well. Depends on whether or not Amari Williams can step up and play physical defense. But I think they win. The other opponent that Kentucky plays this week is Mississippi State. I think Kentucky, after playing both Mississippi State and Georgia, is going to finish this week with a scoring margin of +5. So let's say they win against Georgia by 2, and they win on the road against Mississippi State by 3. That'd be a +5 scoring margin. You beat your opponents by a total of 5 points. All I'm sitting here telling you is that this game against Georgia and this game against Mississippi State, pair of Bulldogs, it's going to be a dog fight. We're gonna learn a lot about Kentucky's team. We're going to learn a lot about Mark Pope here. A lot about Mark Pope. Can you overcome a team that is stylistically similar to a team you've already played in Clemson? Can you overcome a team that has some massive front court presences that have dominated on the offensive glass? You have to grab defensive rebounds in this game. Can you get out of your road shooting slump and play well on the road against a good defense? Can you do those things? Avoid an extremely subpar shooting performance, play average offensively, win the game. Can you do the minimal things that, frankly, a Kentucky team of this caliber is capable of doing? We will have to wait and see. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Oh, wrong hotkey. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow, or later tonight, actually, for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.